Mr. Speaker, what the OBR actually shows is that growth will slow next year compared to the forecasts, and that is what will mean that unemployment will rise. And what the Prime Minister needs to explain is unemployment will fall next year in the USA, it will fall in Germany, it will fall in other major industrial countries, but it will rise in the United Kingdom. Why is that the case?
Well, I know he's determined to talk the economy down. But I mean, even he is going to find difficulty in finding in the Office of Budget Responsibilities report depressing statistics, because generally speaking what they reported was good news for the UK economy. They find, and the last European Commission forecast report he announced found that average UK growth for the next 2 years will be higher than Germany, higher than France, higher than the US, higher than Japan, the Eurozone or the EU average. Now I think it would be more worthwhile for us to debate across these dispatch boxes, how do we get the growth rate of the country up? What reforms do we make to try and make our economy more efficient? Has he got something to say about that, or is it another blank page?
Ed Miliband. Mr. Speaker, he says, how do we get the growth of the economy up? Absolutely right. But what you don't do is put up VAT. What you don't do is put up VAT next year from the 4th of January and cut public spending by £20 billion. That's why the OBR says that we will have the weakest recovery from recession for 40 years. I come back to this point. About unemployment, Mr. Speaker. Can he tell us over the 5 years of the Parliament, when will unemployment return to pre-crisis levels? Because that tests the strength of the recovery. When will it return to the levels before the recession?
Well, we inherited an 8% rate of unemployment, and what the Office of Budget Responsibility says is it will be 6% by the end of the Parliament. He asked the question, he get the answer. But let me just remind him of something. At the last election, the party opposite, himself included, said that if we cut £6 billion out of the budget, that it would end in catastrophe for the British economy. He was proved completely and utterly wrong.
Ed Miliband. Mr. Speaker, have you ever heard a more complacent answer to a question? You have families up and down the country. Worried about their jobs, unemployment rising next year, and all the Prime Minister can say is it's some kind of rosy scenario. Now, let's take the rise in VAT, because that's one of the reasons why unemployment will rise next year. Let's take the rise in VAT. Can the Prime Minister tell us what impact will the rise in VAT have on economic growth and jobs next year?
Well, first of all, let me deal with VAT precisely, because this is what the former Chancellor, the member for Edinburgh South West, said. He said VAT would have allowed you to pay off a sizable chunk of the deficit. That is the policy that the last Chancellor supported. But let me just make this point. If we had followed the advice that he's been giving us over the last 6 months, we would be linked with Portugal, with Ireland. Yes. We wouldn't be standing here today discussing how we're going to get growth to go faster, how we're going to get unemployment to be lower. We'd be sitting around discussing how we're going to rescue and bail out Britain.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, you can only rewrite history for just so long. Let's be absolutely clear about this.
Order! We are wasting the time of backbench members. Let's hear the Leader of the Opposition.
The deficit was 2.5% of national income before the crisis, the recession hit, all around the world. It went up all around the world. It was a global economic recession. The question is, do you cut too far and too fast, which is what he is doing, and mean you have 4 years of sluggish recovery, the most sluggish recovery out of recession in 40 years? Why doesn't the Prime Minister just answer the question? Is this the most sluggish recovery out of recession in Britain for the last 40 years? Yes or no?
This is one of the fastest recoveries in Europe. And the point is, if we'd followed his advice, we wouldn't be discussing recovery, we would be discussing meltdown. That's the point. Look, he can have a blank sheet of paper about the future. He can't have a blank sheet of paper about the past. And we know we were left a record budget deficit. We remember no more boom and bust. We remember all of the things that he was responsible for. And I have to say to him, after all of this from him, he's been doing the job for the last 3 months, and people are beginning to ask, when's he going to start?
Mr. Speaker, with that answer, it's no wonder that today we learn the Foreign Secretary describes this gang as the children of Thatcher. It sounds just like the 1980s, out of touch with people up and down the country. Why doesn't the Prime Minister admit that he is complacent about the recovery, he is complacent about the people who will lose their jobs, and it is they who will pay the price?
Mr. Speaker, not waving but drowning. My mother is still with us, so she will be able to testify that what he's just claimed is not literally true. But let me say this. I'd rather be a child of Thatcher than a son of Brown.
Mr. Speaker.